welcome everyone, and welcome to Welfare Wednesdays. I'm Ren, and I'm your Animal Welfare Education and Research Executive with UBC PAW for this year, and I'm also going to be your host for Welfare Wednesdays for this year. So this is actually our very last Welfare Wednesday for the year, and for today I have a very, very special guest joining us. It's UBC's Animal Welfare Program's own Professor Emeritus, David Fraser. Alright, so Professor Fraser has had a very long and impactful career in the animal welfare field. He has published numerous papers, served on many advisory boards, and also mentored many colleagues and students who have gone on to contribute to the field in their own ways. And so his expertise spans from animal behavior to ethical management, and his work has shaped policies on both a national and international scale. So because of this, in 2005, he was actually appointed Member of the Order of Canada. And very last, but definitely not least, he is a wonderful poet. He has been writing verse for CBC's National Saturday Afternoon radio show in the 1990s, and I believe he's even published some scientific findings in verse.
That's true.
Yes. I mean, I was very excited to find that out. It's very difficult being a poet, and it just shows you know, right? Alright, so thank you so much for being able to join me here today, David. How are you?
Good, thank you, Ren. Lovely introduction, and nice to be able to join everybody today.
Alright, so today we're going to be talking about how the various ways that people influence animal welfare in their care. And so when we talk about keeping animals, people can influence their care on both an individual and on a group scale. And what are the direct effects, both positive and negative, that caregivers can have on an animal's life?
Okay, let me just preface it by saying, when people started to get concerned about animal welfare in the 60s and 70s, the focus was so much on the environments where the animals were kept. So, stalls for sows, small cages for hens, and so on. And almost the entire approach to solving welfare problems was looking at the environments. Also, passing laws about the environments. 20 years later, we started to see that on farms using the same kind of environments, you would actually get extremely different welfare outcomes. So, 100 dairy farms, all using the same kind of stall system, and the incidence of lameness might be 10% in one farm and 90% in another farm, and everything between. Species after species, environment after environment, we saw this kind of variation in the most basic welfare outcomes. So that puts us into looking for what are the other big explanatory factors, and an obvious one is the quality of care that the people provide. This takes us back to some early research around 1980 on handling. And so I think the first thing that people realized was that animal handlers differ greatly in their skill and success in handling animals. Some are very good at it, and the animals aren't stressed. Others are very poor at it. They hit the animals, they shout, they get the animals very revved up. And this can create a sort of chronic stress in the animals that influences their behavior, their welfare, even their productivity. So I think handling was the first thing. Then we started to add other components. One was simply the knowledge that the people had. Some people really understood about animals and their needs and could read their behavior, and others didn't. So having a knowledgeable keeper, very important. In some cases, it looked as though there were personality traits that worked well. So in zoos, you would find some keepers who were really good at dealing with hippos, and other people very unsuccessful in dealing with hippos. And it had something to do with their personality. And one person who looked at this with cattle said the ideal person for working with cattle is a confident introvert. So he means, the person is confident, going to move calmly, confidently among the animals, but is introverted to the point that not making wild gestures or loud noises or shouting or anything like that. He said this sort of person isn't the life of a party, but is very good with cows. Another one is the person's motivation to improve. And we had a beautiful example right from UBC some years ago, a study of about 40 dairy farms, which, as usual, ranged everything from very good to very bad in basic things like lameness. And after that information got passed back to the farmers, some of them were very keen to improve. And so they asked advice, and they took advice. And a year later, those ones had shown a huge improvement. It looks, one vet who has studied this said in his experience there's sort of 3/3 of farmers, those who are very open to advice and implement most of the things they're suggested. Some are sort of medium and implement some things and not others, and others just don't seem to care. And the quality of the care that the animals receive depends a lot then on the motivation of the farmer to do well. Then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. For example, the health and mental health of the person. Study in Quebec found that the level of work-related stress was much higher in farmers than in other occupations. The rate of suicide was somewhat higher in farmers than other occupations. And you can imagine how this influences the quality of care that they're giving to animals. I think in many cases where there's really serious neglect of farm animals, well, in the little bit of research that's been done, in more than half of the cases, you can pinpoint some problem of the health of the farmer or the mental health of the farmer. Somebody experiencing financial stress and family stress, or depression for other reasons, and they just aren't in a mind space where they can provide appropriate care for animals. Another one is how the physical environment affects how people relate to animals. Great study in New Zealand where of the different milking parlors, some well designed so that the animals just flowed in without any shouting and negative encouragement, and others that were so badly designed that the people were shouting and hitting the animals. And the analysis was that there's a three-way interaction here. There's the people, the animals, and there's the environment, which affects how those other two relate. And so we need to take that into account. Anyway, I've put out a whole bunch of stuff there, Ren, but just to say, I think the next big shift in animal welfare will be a shift away from just looking at the environment and trying to regulate the environment, and toward encouraging better human care through a bunch of strategic things like training, knowledge, motivation, personality, environmental design, and so on.
Okay. And I've seen you've written stuff about treating suffering with compassion. Is that kind of how it works into this, changing a mindset almost, or?
Good question. Yes, I think good animal caretakers would, of course, be compassionate. And this is nothing new. So from the early 1700s, at least in the Western culture, the idea of compassion and empathy, these have been seen as virtues, and cruelty has been seen as a vice. And the early efforts to protect animal welfare weren't called efforts to protect animal welfare at all. They were attempts to stamp out the vice of cruelty. So the early reformers weren't just trying to protect animals, they were trying to improve society by stopping people from using the vice of cruelty. So all those old early organizations, right up to the late 1800s, early 1900s in British Columbia, it's not called the British Columbia Society for the Protection of Animals or the Welfare of Animals. It's for the prevention of cruelty to animals, and that's where that word came from. This whole concept that we need to foster the virtue of compassion and get rid of the vice of cruelty. It only, though, goes so far, because a person can be very compassionate but not have good knowledge, or not have a good facility, not having been trained well in handling skills. And so the compassion is of course a contributor, but it isn't the whole story.
And I mean, when we care for animals, there's usually a goal at the end of it, right? And I would assume that's kind of giving the animal a good life, but then that's such a subjective term, right?
Yeah.
So what would you exactly say is a good life for an animal? Like, what should these caregivers aim for, you know?
Good. Well, this is such a profound question, because we can't agree on what is a good life for people. You know, we are people. We've had the experience of being people all our lives, and we're all over the map in what constitutes a good life for a person. And it goes back to Aristotle saying a good life is a life where we achieve our potential. Jeremy Bentham, the 1700s. A good life is a life where we are able to be happy and not suffer, and so on. So there are very different viewpoints on what is a good life for people, and people inevitably then bring this to any discussion of what is a good life for animals. So for some it is, well, they have to be, this is following Aristotle, they have to be able to behave in the way that is natural for their species and learn the kind of things that animals of their species would learn, develop the skills and so on. Others, following Bentham, would say, oh, well, what's important is that the animal be happy and not suffer, so we should focus on pain. We should give the animals opportunity to play because that brings pleasure, those sort of things. So we get quite different views about what is a good life for animals, because those basic values are so ingrained in the human mind and human philosophical debate going back millennia.
Okay, and those are the 5 kind of welfares.
The David Miller's 5 welfare domains, or John Webster's 5 freedoms, are a way of let me go back one step from there. I would say there are 3 main concerns that come up. One is the happiness of the animal, pleasure, pain, and so on. Another is the fulfillment of the animal, so its ability to live in a natural way or exercise the natural adaptations of the species. So we've got the happiness, the naturalness. Then, of course, there's also the health. For some people, what they really want to achieve is a healthy life, and for their animals, to have their animals healthy. So I would say that those are the 3 major concerns. Then people have tried to create checklists for when have we accomplished this. And I would say that the 5 freedoms and the Miller's 5 domains are sort of a way of creating almost like a checklist to say, are we doing all the things that fit under those 3 concerns?
Okay, so that's very interesting, because I was actually going to ask you about practical solutions or steps to take to kind of increase the quality of animal care. But then with this, it's almost like there's no set way that you can, because you're not exactly, it's not something you can categorize.
Well, I think we need to pay attention to all of the different areas of concern. So of course we want the animals to be healthy. We want them to be able to do the things that are natural for that species to do, that are good for the animal. So not necessarily running away from foxes, even however natural that is, it's probably not linked to pleasure. So if we focus on those different goals, we would have different ways of achieving them. And so there isn't one formula for achieving good animal welfare. There's a diversity of things that we'd have to do.
Okay, thank you. And I think that is our time for today, though. But thank you, that was so interesting, and I'm so glad to have you as our very last speaker for this year's Welfare Wednesdays.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ren, and thank you to everyone for your attention.
All right, thank you guys. I hope you guys also enjoyed and learned a bit more about animal welfare for this year.